What's going on, guys? Welcome back to my Friday Night SmackDown review for Friday, November 27, 2020. I am Graham G. Matthews. Hope you guys are doing well. And usually the Black Friday episodes of SmackDown every year are pretty mundane just because of the holiday, and it's pretty predictable that the company phones it in with a blue brand. But I actually thought this year's episode, this year's Black Friday edition of the show, was pretty decent as it kind of moved forward several storylines, featured fallout from the pay-per-view last Sunday, Survivor Series, set the stage for some matches we might be seeing at TLC, and more importantly than anything else, did not feature any holiday silliness whatsoever. It seems like it's a pretty, again, annual thing that we see every year, the Thanksgiving food fight and shit, which again can be entertaining at times. I'm a sucker for the holiday silliness and whatnot, specifically around Halloween and Christmas time. But we did not see any of that on SmackDown this year in regards to Thanksgiving. Maybe Christmas, because Christmas does fall actually on a Friday this year, so they're probably not taping live. If they are, that's kind of shitty. I mean, they did tape live on Christmas, about 3 years ago, maybe, in 2017? They moved away from that, I think, in 2018, because they realized it was stupid, and it doesn't make the show any more must-see than it would have if it was just taped. But that will be interesting to see how they handle it. I'm assuming they will tape it in advance or whatever, or maybe move the show to a different night for the week. I'm not exactly sure. But I assume we'll probably get a Miracle on 34th Street fight on that type of show, which is perfectly fine because I love that shit. But as far as this show goes, it was pretty straightforward, and it was very, I would say, enjoyable on the whole. Maybe not the greatest episode of SmackDown in recent memory, but it was pretty efficient on several different fronts here. So we kicked off the show with Jey Uso, who kind of explained his actions from Survivor Series. Because if you can recall, he was the last one eliminated for Team SmackDown in that men's 5-on-5 elimination tag team match. And then Roman said there would be consequences to suffer as a result of not winning that match for us, and he said for him to leave the building. Jey Uso, of course, did not leave the building. We saw him resurface later on in the night, aid Roman Reigns to victory, interfere in Reigns versus McIntyre, attack McIntyre, which led to Roman hitting the low blow on Drew, I think hitting another spear, or no, it was the guillotine. He locked in the guillotine on Drew. Drew passed out. Didn't tap out, but Roman Reigns was awarded the victory. Despite Jey's actions on that show, Roman was still pissed as he came out here and explained to Jey that Jey did not leave the building as he instructed. So I'm glad Jey, while he did attempt to make it up to Roman wasn't like, all is forgiven, blah, blah, blah. He gave him an order, and he disobeyed that order. And as a result, again, he shamed him here. He scolded him. I thought this was fantastic. The entire Roman Reigns Jey Uso saga has been undoubtedly the best part about this show for months now, which is something I did not think I would say 6 months ago, a year ago, 2 years ago. But Roman and Jey, specifically Jey, and Roman's just been great in the heel role, but Jey has been just an absolute revelation during this entire angle, in the sense that he was a tag team guy, again, 6, 7, 8 months ago, who I just could not have cared less about on his own. But now on his own, and he's not really on his own, he's with Roman, but he can be taken seriously as a single star now, which has been fantastic. He's been featured in main events now with Daniel Bryan, Kevin Owens this week. He faced AJ Styles many, many weeks ago, beat him. He's beaten all of these people, Bryan, AJ, and Owens. And in doing so, it's built up his credibility to the point where we can take him seriously in a main event role. Maybe not as the world champion, obviously, but in facing these people in the main event of SmackDown. So I thought this segment was good. Obviously, it kind of put, not a bounty on Jey, but it kind of, not inspired him, motivated him, I think is the right word I was looking for. Motivated him to do what he did later on in the show and attacking Otis right after the segment was over, because Otis was supposed to go one-on-one with King Corbin here. And then he attacked Otis before Otis could even make it to the ring. So that match didn't happen. He attacked Daniel Bryan later on in the show. He went after Kevin Owens, which led to the night's main event. So he is making a lot of enemies on SmackDown right now, is Jey Uso. And I'm glad it doesn't look like they're headed in the not obvious direction, but the direction I feared they would go in coming off of this opening segment was that Jey would ultimately disobey Roman, go back and rebel and whatever, and we would get one more match from Jey and Roman to the TLC pay-per-view. It does not look like that'll be the case, nor should it be. I just think Jey, at this point, as great as those matches were with Roman at Clash of Champions and Hell in the Cell, is better in a lackey role for Roman than he would be feuding with him. Because we know he's not going to beat Roman, again, and nor should he. but I think he's better in this role of kind of being conflicted, and rightfully so. It makes sense because he was the man of the people 2 months ago, and now all of a sudden he's just this full-blown heel. So for him to show, hesitation in doing what he's done makes perfect sense. But I just feel like breaking him away from Roman, at least anytime soon, I feel like would be a waste, because it would be, a cool moment for a very short-term gain. They would get one more match out of it, Roman would win, and then it's back to the fucking undercard for Jey Uso. So I'm liking the direction they're going in with this instead. We then got the Street Profits taking on Dolph Ziggler and Robert Roode. Now, we did get this match originally for the SmackDown Tag Team titles about a month ago on that SmackDown premiere show, right before Hell in a Cell. The match ended rather quickly. It ended in a double DQ. And it made me think, okay, we're probably going to get a rematch between these two teams for the tag titles of the Hell in a Cell pay-per-view. Didn't get it. Thought it would be addressed coming out of the pay-per-view. That didn't happen either. So they didn't say... Well, they kind of made mention of the fact they did beat the Profits in that six-man tag team match, and that was like 2 months ago, a month and a half ago, whatever. In that main event on Raw, it was, I think, Roode, Ziggler, and Orton versus McIntyre and the Profits, and I think Roode or Ziggler pinned one of the Profits, I believe. Or no, actually Orton pinned McIntyre, but still, Roode and Ziggler picked up the win over the tag team champions. What they did take exception to was the fact that the tag titles were just swapped, because they were owed a shot of the Raw tag team titles coming out of that match. And then the tag titles were just swapped when New Day went to Raw and the Profits went to SmackDown. Now, granted, they did get 2 title shots that very next week. They faced the New Day because they said that exact same thing on Raw a month and a half ago. They got an impromptu title shot against the New Day on Raw, and obviously they lost, being a part of SmackDown now. That kind of made the outcome pretty obvious. And then they got a SmackDown tag team title shot later on in the week, again, as I just mentioned, against the Profits. And the match was over within minutes, and they should have been owed another shot or at least continued the feud, but WWE probably realized we have Survivor Series coming up, so we'll get back to this after the pay-per-view. They did. It was a good match. Roode and Ziggler won. They'll probably get the... they could always do it on SmackDown. They tend to do a lot of big matches on Raw and SmackDown nowadays. I assume the WWE title match, like with McIntyre facing either AJ Lee or Matt Riddle, or Riddle, rather, will probably be taking place on Raw and not at TLC. So I could see this rematch with the tag titles happening on an upcoming episode of SmackDown, but personally, being the traditionalist that I am, I would save it for the TLC pay-per-view next month. Speaking of non-title action, we got another rematch here, this time from WrestleMania 36 between the Intercontinental Champion Sami Zayn and Daniel Bryan. Now, these two obviously go back, as I just said, all the way back to WrestleMania 36, when Zayn beat Bryan to retain the title. Now, it looked like the feud would continue coming out of that event, but then Zayn just disappeared. He wasn't on the show for a few weeks, and then it became clear that he was taking time off due to the pandemic. And that was when he had to vacate the championship, blah, blah, blah. So they've kind of been interacting a bit in the last couple of weeks. Bryan has called out Zayn for not being a fighting Intercontinental Champion, and I'm all for that. The problem is that Bryan should be in the Universal Championship picture right now. It's not like they could do a match with Zayn and Bryan at TLC. Because Bryan, I don't think at this point, maybe earlier on in the year, but at this point, probably should not be getting back the Intercontinental Championship. He should be facing Roman Reigns, maybe at WrestleMania this coming year, but not quite right now. So it's not like he can lose to Zayn and then challenge Roman. The guy should be winning a lot more. And he lost here via countout, though, so I thought it was okay. I thought it was clever the way that they did this. So the match was very good, as expected. Probably even better than the Mania match, because you didn't have Nakamura and Cesaro and Gulak at ringside. It was a straight-up singles match, and they fucking killed it. Zayn looked great as always. The way that Zayn is booked sometimes is a bit fluky, but when it comes to matches, the guy can always hold his own. Zayn is very, very good. No surprise there. So this was great. What happened was Zayn ran to the back. Bryan chased after him. They both disappeared to the backstage area. Only Zayn reemerged, re-entered the ring, and was awarded the victory by countout. Bryan was not seen until the cameras cut to the back, and we see Jey Uso beating up on Bryan in the backstage area. So clearly Jey is not happy about Bryan beating him last week in the SmackDown main event. Bryan has obviously made an enemy out of Jey Uso as well as Roman Reigns. And that's either going to happen at TLC or the Rumble. I'll get to that a little later on in regards to what we might get at TLC with Roman Reigns in the Universal Championship. But that was a good way of progressing that storyline, giving Zayn a win, and not repeating what you just did in the opener by having the champion lose a non-title match. Because I figured that would be the easy way of setting up a rematch between the two for the Intercontinental Championship. But this was non-title. and Zayn won by countout. I thought this was very well done. So we then got Bianca Belair versus Natalya, a straight-up singles match. Good stuff here. It was fairly short, but it didn't really need to be longer than it was. I'm sure they could do better than they did here, but the focus wasn't really on Belair versus Natalya. It was more so on Belair making an enemy out of Bayley. So Bayley's been going back and forth with Bianca on Twitter now for a while, like since the draft, probably before then. I don't know how far back their Twitter beef goes, but they've been going back and forth on social media for quite a while now. So at Survivor Series, Bayley took exception to the fact that Belair lost for SmackDown of the pay-per-view, except for the fact that Bayley was actually the first one eliminated by Peyton Royce from Raw, and Natalya was the one who took out Royce, which was dumb. So I guess the idea was if Bianca can beat Natalya, then she can beat Bayley. And I'm sure they're grooming for a match. They're setting up for a match between Bayley and Belair. Again, I wouldn't do that on SmackDown. I would save that for TLC. Give Belair a big pay-per-view victory over the former SmackDown Women's Champion. I just think that makes the most sense. So I liked what we got here. I thought this was good. Belair came across great. I love the idea of a Bayley-Belair feud. What they should do is groom Belair for a future shot at the SmackDown Women's Championship. And one way to do that would be having her beat the former champion. So I think that's great. But yeah, this was good. I think having her beat Bayley, beat Bayley at TLC makes the most sense. And then from there, maybe she wins the Women's Royal Rumble in January. But either way, I think all roads should lead to Bianca versus Banks at WrestleMania 37 for the SmackDown Women's Championship. So I mentioned earlier that we were supposed to get Otis versus King Corbin in action. Otis got attacked, match didn't happen. Corbin got to pick his new opponent, I guess. So we made some comments towards the Mysterio family backstage, poked fun of the Mysterio family and Murphy, blah, blah, blah. Shockingly, the fact that Murphy is dating a 19-year-old girl and he is 32 years old was not among the jokes that he made, but I guess WWE doesn't want to draw attention to that from a storyline standpoint. So anyway, Murphy and Corbin was made official for the show. It was a fine match, but there was way too much fucking involvement from Ray and Aaliyah and Dominic, who were all at ringside, by the way. Which is making me think that the only reason why Murphy is with this family to begin with, I really don't want to see another Murphy heel turn, is because he's using them to gain advantages in his matches. And maybe that is the right way to go, just because I don't want to see Murphy continue his matches to continue to be watered down via interference from Ray, Dominic, and Aaliyah. Having Aaliyah out there is bad enough, when they really should just acknowledge they're an item on TV and then quietly kind of phase it out until we don't hear about it anymore. A lot like Otis and Mandy Rose, which was actually a good storyline they had going. This Murphy-Aaliyah shit is just terrible. It's just too much. I just don't care. What is this, leading to Murphy and Dominic and Ray versus Corbin and two Stooges? And Corbin did lose here. Corbin lost after interference from the Mysterio family. This was just shit. The match was fine, but I just don't like the whole... First of all, Corbin is good, but Corbin and the Mysterio family might arguably be worse than when Rollins was feuding with them, because at least Rollins we know can be a great heel. Corbin's a great heel too. The matches aren't bound to be anything amazing, especially after what we got from Corbin and Mysterio a couple of weeks ago. That wasn't all that great. So anyway, Corbin loses. He gets on the mic afterward and proclaims that next time he won't be alone, or he's going to even the odds, whatever. So kind of teasing that he's going to have backup next time. Who that could be, I have no fucking clue. He was friends with Ziggler and Roode for a little while, either earlier on this year or late last year. I think it was late last year, earlier this year. Because they were kind of helping him in his feud with Roman Reigns, which led to like the obvious Reigns and Uso 6-man tag team matches, blah, blah, blah. But they seem busy right now with the Prophet, so I'm not going to say Roode and Ziggler. Maybe Cesaro and Nakamura, they kind of associated themselves with him as well around Money in the Bank time. Probably Cesaro and Nakamura. We haven't seen those guys on the show in several weeks. Cesaro was not in that, dual branded battle royal at Survivor Series on the kickoff show. Nakamura was. Cesaro was not. That's probably who he's talking about. I'm not really sure who else, what other teams there are fucking on SmackDown right now. Honestly, I have no clue. So I'm going to guess Cesaro and Nakamura. Doesn't instill a lot of faith in me, but whatever. The feud is what it is. It just feels like filler at this point. We get to the main event of the show, Kevin Owens versus Jey Uso in a rematch from a few weeks ago. Another good match from them. Owens won via DQ after Uso pulled out the chair and attacked Owens with it. Owens gets fucking pissed after everything that the, Roman, Jey, Paul Heyman dynasty, whatever you want to call them, stable. After everything they've done on SmackDown up to this point, he got really, really frustrated to the point where he just attacked Jey Uso with a chair. Went berserk, called out Roman, looked right into the camera, and Roman was watching from the back. Said to Roman, I'm done with your family drama, and I'm coming after you, basically. So this begs the question, do we do Roman and Bryan at TLC for the Universal Championship, or is it going to be Roman versus Kevin Owens? I would say Kevin Owens, just because Kevin Owens feels more like a filler opponent, and I love KO. But Bryan, I feel like, especially with the history that these two have, would be absolutely fucking perfect for the Royal Rumble pay-per-view. Now, you could do a triple threat. Now, I assume next week we get Owens and Bryan versus Reigns and Uso. That makes the most sense at this point. But I just think, I don't know, I just feel like if we get, I guess they could do a triple threat, but I would rather they just save the first in-ring interaction, like one-on-one. I guess that'd be a triple threat, but between Roman and Bryan for the Rumble. And again, they could do a triple threat. Owens gets pinned, and then Bryan has a case for why he should get another title shot of the Rumble pay-per-view. Bryan probably shouldn't be losing. I think it would just make more sense. Honestly, this is the direction they should probably go in. Bryan and Uso, because they both have one win apiece over each other at TLC in like a fucking, honestly, chairs match. That would make the most sense after all the chairs that have been used in the storyline. And then you could do Roman and KO. TLC feels a little much, but that hasn't stopped them from doing matches like that before with the TLC stipulation. For example, Roman and Corbin last year was not TLC worthy. It was one of the worst TLC matches I've seen in several years, if not ever. And Owens and Roman, I'm sure, would be a lot better. They have great chemistry. I think that's the direction they should go in as opposed to a triple threat. Maybe you could do the triple threat on SmackDown, like on the final SmackDown of the year. And then Owens gets pinned again, and you set the stage for Bryan and Roman at the Rumble. Maybe that's what they do. They could always do that. But yeah, I'm interested. I'm interested in the whole Universal Championship picture right now. It has been must-see for a while now. All of SmackDown seems to have a lot of cool things going on. I forgot to mention this earlier, but Sami Zayn got confronted backstage after his match with Bryan by Big E. So that looks to be a new feud as well. That looks to be like it could be a new feud over the Intercontinental Championship. So they got Zayn and Big E going on right now. Bryan feuding with Uso and Reigns, Owens feuding with Uso and Reigns, and he's been doing a whole lot of nothing lately, so I like that idea. Bianca and Bayley, I love that feud. And, Ziggler and Roode and the Profits is what it is, but it's a logical feud to do over the SmackDown Tag Team titles at this point in time. The only thing I didn't really care about from the show was the fact that, Murphy and Corbin and the Mysterio family, I didn't really give a shit about that stuff, but the rest of the show I thought was very good. And they have the pieces in place for what I think could be a very interesting post-Survivor Series season for SmackDown in the remainder of 2020. Now, I should mention this real quick. They did not have Lars Sullivan on the show. He was a pretty big part of SmackDown as soon as he came back. He returned on SmackDown. He was drafted to SmackDown. He beat Jeff Hardy. He beat Chad Gable. They did interviews with him on the show. He was pretty prominently featured on SmackDown upon his return, and we haven't seen him in like 2 or 3 weeks. I think this was the third straight week we've not seen Lars Sullivan on SmackDown. And it's weird. I know not everyone's a Lars Sullivan fan, and people are probably celebrating the fact that he wasn't on the show or hasn't been on the show lately. But I feel like he could be an important part of the show. They built him up enough for the fact that he isn't on the show anymore seems bizarre. Now, I know that last interview segment he did with Corey Graves or Michael Cole. I don't know, one of the two. One week he did one with Corey. The other one he did with Michael Cole. Wasn't very good at all, and maybe that turned Vince off on the idea of pushing the guy, but I don't know. It just seems really bizarre. This is typical WWE, but it seems very bizarre to invest in someone as heavily as they did with Lars, and then we just don't hear from him anymore. So hopefully he resurfaces soon. For what, I'm not really sure. For what kind of feud, I don't know. But at least they're getting Big E back on the show. That was another criticism I had, that he had all this momentum and then he just fucking disappeared. And he was interacting with the Profits, like who cares? Going into Survivor Series. But it looks now that he could be facing Sami for the Intercontinental title TLC, and that could be very exciting. So I thought overall a very good episode of SmackDown, and hopefully next week's show is equally entertaining. So check out all my other SmackDown reviews in the description box down below. Click the link for more SmackDown reviews dating back to the very first Fox episode of SmackDown in October of 2019. Like the video, drop a comment, share the video, and subscribe to the channel for more daily content. Hit that bell button as well to be notified every time a new video goes up. So we will be back right after this with a review of Talking Smack, also from today. So stay tuned for that. Those videos usually go up simultaneously, so you probably know better than I do at this point. But enjoy the rest of your weekend, folks. I'm Graham G. Matthews, and I'll catch your ass down the road.